Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. We thought after VUCA, we're going to talk through something else today, but first I want to welcome in my co-host, Michael Regan, and I am Kathryn Peterson. So VUCA kind of went through uncertainty and being kind of rolling with that a little bit and knowing that the world is uncertain. And today we're going to go through a little bit more about the mindset and talk through the Stockdale Paradox. So there was a person in the military who was held as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and his name was James Bond Stockdale. He was held with John McCain and others. And there was this kind of thought about if you have a specific date in mind, it can hurt your mindset. And that's a little bit vague. So let me clarify. So he realized that the prisoners who heard things like, hey, we're definitely going to be out by Christmas, or this is going to be the last birthday that I have to celebrate here because someone's gonna come and get us out of here. The food's gonna get better because we saw, them bring in some better food. So as soon as they started hearing these very specifics, it was detrimental for their mindset. And that's what we want to cover a little bit today. But Michael is way more of an expert in this. He's talked to me about this topic a few times, so I'm excited to hear more about it. Michael, give us the overview of Stockdale Paradox.
Well, you did a great job of peppering it with several of the facts, so I won't waste too much of our energy other than maybe to weave a few of those together. So, as Admiral Stockdale and others were held in that imprisonment, a strange thing was happening. Certain men were making it, and certain men weren't. And so the study of what happened afterwards, after Stockdale did in fact, make it home alive. He, like Senator McCain, went on to live a long life. In fact, I think Admiral Stockdale passed away in, I believe it was, 2005 in Coronado.
Oh,
So, he lived a long life. But the point was they had to look back and say, well, why was that? Why did certain, all of these men were trained very similarly in terms of their ability to handle and survive such a horrible circumstance. Now you can make the argument, who's really prepared for that? But believe me, part of their military training in war was, in the event of capture, they had a set of rules to follow in order to not only navigate that reality, but also to be able to survive it. And I think what they learned was, as you said, certain people in the midst of that uncertainty would get attached to very concrete things in order to just handle the chaos of that imprisonment. So whether that was those things you gave examples of or many others, they would get attached to those ideas to give them hope. Well, if you really look at what they found out afterwards after studying this and thus naming it the Stockdale Paradox, there are really two things that have to go on at the same time. And those that survived tethered that version of hoping for something specific with the knowledge that this volatility that they were experiencing could continue without end. And so they had to find some balance between the two of those to allow them to continue to stay focused on one day at a time, surviving one day at a time. And in order to do that, it really tested I think the mental fitness of a lot of these soldiers who, let's face it, were in just horrible situations. So if any of you out there were listening and had relatives that served in Vietnam, first of all, God bless you. That is a awful circumstance that anyone has to serve in any war. That and war in particular just seemed to have a huge scar on our American history. But the paradox today brings out an opportunity for us to look at, well, what was it about Stockdale's ability to tether those two realities and navigate somewhere in between them? What is that? What can we learn from that? How can we apply that as a mindset lesson? So I think that's the way you set it up, Kathryn. So if you think about that, look at our world today. We live in a world in which our economic conditions are really unpredictable. We're doing our best to anticipate the way things are going to go, but you and I in business are somewhat required to understand how the economy has a trickle down effect on the very people that we want to serve in the housing industry. And for our audience out there, I think it's no different for you, regardless of the industry you're in. You have to be aware of economic conditions because that may determine simple things like, are people comfortable spending money? Are people more likely to save money? Are people more likely to borrow money? What kind of decisions are they going to make? I think today we've got a lot of people just like the mindset of these gentlemen. And I know I want to compare the circumstances. We are definitely blessed to be in a season of peace here in the United States, at least currently. And so this is not a comparison of the conditions they were in; it's the mindset. We we today are in an economic reality in which people start looking at dates that are promised or
Mhm.
meetings that are scheduled or circumstances. I don't know, say an election. About the time you all be listening to this, that will have already happened. So that's kind of fun. We'll look back at this episode and say, oh, people said if this happened or that happened, we'd see these things follow. Well, we'll know by then. Kathryn, I think we have to acknowledge that in a season like this, where we have so many people holding on to the hope that certain dates, certain meetings, certain events are going to lead to outcomes that are more favorable, is a lot like the mindset of those prisoners you described who were just hoping no more birthdays here, no more holidays here. And I do have some concern after our episode on VUCA that while people may be willing to acknowledge, okay, that sounds a lot like the reality I'm in, they still don't understand what it's going to take to come out on the other side. So let's talk about that a little bit today. And
Mhm.
let's use some of our experience in the housing industry to illustrate it. And let's hope our audience can follow along if they're in a different industry, because I think the parallel lines will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that this is so fascinating because it's such a very precarious balance. And I can always find myself tipping from one to the other of like, I keep thinking I have to have optimism because that's what keeps me going. But you also have to have reality, but you have to be careful with the optimism that it's not too specific. So give us some tips on kind of what to do with your mindset because I think that's the hardest thing and we've in our industry seen a lot of people leave and it's potentially for this because you get so tied into it's going to get better and you tell people that and you tell yourself that and then it keeps not getting better. So talk us through some
Yeah.
ways to work through that.
Well, you're already tipping on some really good words, so let's just talk about those, whether it's optimism or realism. And
Mhm.
you'll get people that'll debate you on your definition of realism or my definition of realism. But
Or
uh,
pessimism. I'm just going to bring that in.
well, I've never been anyone who enjoys being around a pessimist, but there are times later where we'll review the facts and say maybe they were a little more realistic than we
Yes.
wanted to admit.
Yes. Very
Um,
true.
it's kind of like drama. You go into an office environment, everyone will tell you, "Oh, I hate drama," but it's amazing how many people will in fact participate in it once it shows up. Listen, I think if I, as a coach, am viewing this through the lens of my job is to help people navigate that reality. That's part of my job. So one of the tools I use is called a CIA exercise. You may remember this because it's a simple whiteboard exercise. And if we're on video, I'll just have you grab a journal and we'll do it on a journal page. But I divide the whiteboard with two vertical lines, so they look like two parallel lines. So I end up with three columns. And I'll put a C at the top of the left column, an I at the top of the middle column, and the A at the top of the far right column. And I'll begin to ask questions that allow my client to describe the things they control. And we're going to list as many of those in the left column as we can. And control has a simple definition. You personally can make it happen. We
Mm,
just keep it simple. What can you
yeah.
do today? What can you do to make something happen? And so we'll get the control down. Then we'll go over to the far right and I'll say, okay, before we describe this as the things you don't control, let's acknowledge that if you don't control them, you have to make a choice. And so I'll remind them that the A is for accept. How can I get you to accept these things? Because you don't control them. They're not
Mhm.
within your control. You don't get to decide what horrible events are happening in the Middle East right now. They're happening. They are influencing our economy, but you don't get to control them. You don't get to control what's happening with the economy in Japan right now as they find out they've got a real age problem there because demographically they've got a lot of healthy older people and not as many younger people coming up behind them to contribute to the system, and so it's top heavy. I could give other examples. The point is, these are things that we don't control, therefore we accept them. So let's list as many of those things that impact you. I mean, let's don't list random things. Let's choose things
Mhm.
that you don't control, but you have to accept. So in your housing world, Kathryn, let's just give a couple of examples of these. Name two or three things in the housing industry that today, when you woke up, you knew you had control over. If you just said, I've got to make something happen today, what do you have control over?
I'm gonna what my tasks and activities are and what my
Mm-hmm.
mindset is.
Mm-hmm.
And
So I'd ask you to write down
yeah.
activities. I'd ask you to write down mindset, and we might
Mhm.
even explore what are some of those activities. We might explore, describe the mindset, but those are great examples. Pick one more.
Mhm.
What else do you think you have control over?
My relationships, who I reach out to.
Great examples. These are perfect. So if you have control over the activities, the mindset, and the relationships you engage with, we'll list those down. What are some things in your business context that you have to accept because you just don't have control over them?
Rates.
Interest rates probably come top of mind for a lot of folks.
Yeah. The market, and I
Okay.
mean, like, who's buying and who's selling and what that
So the
looks
housing
like.
market is probably
Mhm.
not under your control. Fair enough. Anything else come to mind?
I'm gonna add the weather, but only because I'm in
Sure.
a ski town, so it's a fair one to use.
No, I think it's absolutely a fair one to use because, hey, look, even Phoenix, Arizona has to have that on their list in the summer. So, we all
Right.
have a season in which housing is affected by the weather. It's a reality. Okay,
Mhm.
great. Perfect examples. See that middle column?
Mhm.
We
I
call
know
that the
it's
column of,
empty. I have notes.
yeah, we call that the influence column. And
Yeah.
if I look at the things in which I have influence over, I start to look at both the column to my left and the column to my right. And I realize, okay, I may not control interest rates, but I have influence over how I communicate about rates to the people that I have to engage with today. I may not control the economy, but I have influence over how I take all of the information available about the economy and help boil it down as an educator to the audience I serve. So I think communication is a huge area of influence.
Mhm.
Do any others come to mind as you think about that? They don't always have to relate to the right and the left, but what else comes to mind when you think of where I might have some influence today?
I think in preparation, you can have
Bingo.
influence. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
for sure. Because that is something that if you think about how what you control, you get to control how you prepare. So that maybe falls on the left column, but then your influence is what you do with that prep,
Mhm.
what you do with it. So that might be how you show up at the office. That might be how you set the tone for the meeting that you're in. And I think that's gonna maybe we'll move past this one just to keep our topic flowing. I think of influence this way. If I focus every day on first making sure my best energy goes toward that column on the left, sorry, that's my left over there, um, the things that I control, and I second release the things that I have to accept because I have no control over them, I want to spend the rest of my day in the middle giving as
Mhm.
much positivity to the things I influence as possible. So that means I have to have an attitude of humility. I have to have grace for people that maybe aren't in the same mindset as me. I have to
Yeah.
have some empathy for those that are hurting. Those are all things I have influence over. And so if my attitude, I think I would put in that column as well. There's no perfect list here, but I think my attitude is a huge thing. I one of my favorite quotes from a pastor, ironically, who's since gone. I may have referenced this one to you before, but he had a beautiful quote where he said, "I'm convinced in life that in my life I have to deal with 10% of the things that happen to me. The other 90% are how I choose to react to them." And I think the beauty in that quote, and I probably just butchered it, but I think you get the general idea, is that 10% of life are things you just have to deal with. But the other
Mm-hmm.
90% is in the attitudes. It's how you deal with them. And so I really want
Mm-hmm.
to lean heavily on that middle column. And so going back to our Stockdale Paradox, I think CIA is a great tool in coaching for any small business owner, really in
Mm-hmm.
any industry, to slow their roll. If they're starting to feel that that paradox is tipping them to be too optimistic, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to be fine. I think in the housing industry, it was about a year and a half ago that some folks got attached to a date called May 6th. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was going to be the date in which interest rates finally hit their economic peak, and we were going to have a nice steady run after that of lowering interest rates. Did that happen, Catherine?
No, it did
No, it didn't.
not.
And the reason, we can debate why it did or didn't happen. I think more importantly was the reason this topic is important is people got attached to that. And when it didn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
you saw some people literally have a mental yard sale. They could not handle it for the rest of the summer.
Yeah.
And by the
Yeah.
time the fall came and it was still going, they were like, let me up. I've had enough. I don't think I could do this anymore. Well, today we sit in a season where I think some of those same combination of influences
Mm-hmm.
exist, and those that are mentally strong are going to find a way to navigate through this, and those that aren't are going to struggle. So the CIA exercise helps you pause and just sort your thoughts out and get really clear on an ownership mindset. And I'm going to argue you own a lot of things in that influence category, even if you don't
Mm-hmm.
totally control them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, as you look at that, I hope you can picture that helping our audience. Let's also uh, talk about another thing that's coming up. I know you and I, again, by the time this airs, this may have happened, but you and I will be in a room with another
Mm-hmm.
20 some odd professionals here in a few weeks. And most of these folks are influencers in the housing industry that we operate. Um, how important is it to you when we think about what's happening in this mindset shift between optimism and pessimism and wherever we define realism? How important is it to you to network with other really deep thinking professionals in your field? How important is that to you?
I think it's huge depending on the person because you get to see what their forward thinking is and how they're helping their teams and themselves stay in a good spot mindset wise. I think comes down to circle of influence, which we've heard forever of who are you talking to, where are you getting your information from, what are people focusing on? And I'll tell you, they're probably saying, hey, what are 2025, 2026 looking like?
So that's really interesting you say that. I think that's a great preview of what I do expect in a room like that is I think people are starting to aim a little higher and a little longer with their business vision in order to create
Mhm.
strategic plans that might take a little longer to play out than just
Mhm.
the spring season. We spent so long because of the COVID season somewhat readjusting our operating models to much shorter
Mhm.
seasons because of the way the volatility was shifting so many unknown things in our economy in 2020 and 2021 that by
Mhm.
2022 we had sort of bought into this idea of, well, just plan one quarter at a time because that's about the best you can do. You just can't think past that because who
Yeah.
knows what the world looks like. And we could debate whether that was smart or not, but it's certainly understandable. I mean, the
Mhm.
circumstances of what was happening for all of us made it really difficult to plan too much further in the future. So that may have been appropriate for that season. The danger of staying in that mindset is you start to become very reactive in your business model if all you're doing is planning one quarter at a time and that
Mhm.
plan isn't oriented toward a long-term vision. Don't confuse this, or for our audience, it's like, wait a minute, you talked about quarterly planning. I'm a huge fan of quarterly planning in the context of a long-term vision. This is kind of similar to if you and I are planning a road trip, as Lori and I are about to do. I have a long-term vision of landing in Franklin, Tennessee, but I have a
Mhm.
plan between Portland and Boise. I have a plan between Boise and Salt Lake City. So I have these short-term plans, but they're oriented toward a long-term vision of what we're going to be doing. In fact, I could maybe make the argument the real long-term vision is to end up in Phoenix, Arizona. So it's a big old loop. Um, the point of that example is I think, yes, we want quarterly plans in our business, but if they're not oriented toward this longer term vision with a strategy, the risk is A, we become very reactive leaders, and therefore we are now at the risk of having to give up a lot of things in that control column because
Mm-hmm.
we no longer take control over those. We just start to
Mm-hmm.
react to them. And the other is that some of the audience is in fact making that shift, which means your competition is going to get a leg up on you. They're going to be a step or two ahead of you, whether the economic conditions that are coming in our industry and housing might lead to a better purchase market or a refinance opportunity or other niche products that they might be able to bring to the market. They'll be ahead of those that are reactive because they know that those steps they're taking today are aiming them toward the future they see. So I think you're right. When we network with a group like that, these are going to be forward-thinking people, and I want to be around forward-thinking people at a time where maybe a lot of people are stuck in the prison of their own minds, feeling like I just can't do this anymore. I can't predict the future anymore. I'm just holding on and hoping for the best. Well, if that's you out there, first of all, I feel sad because that is not a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But second of all, I hope you're listening to what Kathryn and I are bringing today to encourage you that this is a season in which, like the Stockdale Paradox, if you can embrace that reality that we may not have a date for you, there may not be a specific window of time, but you don't forget to hope for the future while dealing with that one day at a time reality and just staying focused on an exercise like CIA, you might find that your ability to control a few things that are really personal and
Mm-hmm.
internal, and then influence a lot of things just based on things like your attitude and your communication and how, like Kathryn said, you execute on the preparation that you did for just that day. My hope is that helps you continue to move forward toward that future that you see and maybe allows you to separate a little bit from people that you compete with that just haven't made that decision. And let's face it, in your business, Kathryn, do you walk into I know you walk into a lot of real estate offices. Is it more fun to work with people who are holding on to some hope for a better future? Or do you enjoy being around curmudgeons who think the best days of real estate have already passed?
Oh, I can think of both of those. Yeah, certainly the first. Those people with optimism and long-term planning and just who are fun and excited about the industry are definitely the best to hang around.
Yeah, so if I were to sum this topic up, I'd say maintain some sense of hope, but tether it to reality. And if you can somehow balance hope and reality, there is a narrow way that you can keep moving forward through uncertain times. My guess is uncertainty is our new normal. My guess is I need to be prepared that the easy days of doing things have probably left us because we now live in a world of AI to where even when human beings might feel like, okay, things are finally settling down again, guess what? Somebody's out there with a bot figuring out how to answer questions
Mhm.
that you didn't even think of asking. And they're leaping ahead. I don't fear that world because I think that world actually creates a lot of opportunities for those of us who are relationship focused. But I have to approach each day with some sense of hope and reality if I'm going to navigate this and get out on the other side. And last but not least, and Kathryn, I think this applies to any of us who live in the housing industry. When you look into 2025, 26, all the way out to maybe 2030, is it important to you to have someone tell you what's going to happen, like on this date or at this time or when this person has control? Is that going to dictate the future that you're going to work in, or how do you react when you hear people attaching their decisions to what other people are going to do?
I think you can take it all in and think, huh, I wonder why that's their plan. Let me dig into it more. But I think you have to make your own plan ultimately. Obviously, knowing someone who knew specific dates of markets would be helpful to have, but none of us are going to have that. So I think it's taking all that information in, but also taking it with a grain of salt, because you can find a person who says exactly the opposite if you look.
Yeah, that wasn't a setup, folks. We're not scripting this. I asked Kathryn that question because I pretty much knew that was the direction she'd go with the answer. And I hope what you heard is don't reject it. Don't just say, well, if you're talking about that, you know, delete or, unfriended or whatever people do today, you're blocked. Don't shut it out. Be curious, because you can always learn from this person. But here's why that's important, just in case you're wondering, but why would I want to learn from somebody who's trying to do that? Because someone in your audience today that's counting on you, could be a teammate, could be a partner, could be a customer, they might be thinking that way too. And you want to be able to have a conversation with that person rooted in some degree of understanding. If they feel like you've shut them out, just like you shut out that person who was trying to throw out something specific, they won't feel heard or understood by you, and they'll probably shut you out. They probably won't want to do business with you. So I think it is important, like Kathryn said, do listen, but listen with a sense of filter. Like, okay, help me understand why you think that. Help me understand what you're thinking, and see if you can learn something from them that allows you to be able to navigate that middle road as you engage with folks in your sphere of influence today. Kathryn, any closing thoughts on the Stockdale Paradox as it applies to the world we get to live in?
I think it's a very applicable topic right now, because I think that we do get attached to dates. We do want hope so badly. We do want things to improve so badly. So it's good to balance it with what's going to be good for your mindset in this time. So thanks for bringing this up, and thanks for discussing it. I think this is going to be one of those episodes that we're going to refer to and say, listen to this, because this may be important for you to keep your mindset in check.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think the same thing is we need something to keep our hope alive. No question about it. And I hope today this episode wasn't a hope killer for anybody. It's a reminder that hope tethered in reality allows you to find the narrow way. And if you can keep moving in that direction, you will get to embrace a lot of things in that center column. So I hope that's the assignment for any of you that listen today. Go make a CIA whiteboard or a journal, as Kathryn did in her remarkable tablet, and make sure that you've really thought through, what are the things I truly control today, and let's own those first, because if you control them, get them done. And then what are the things I don't control that I need to accept today, so I can release those? Don't carry those around like a bag of bricks all day. They're just weighing you down. And then get excited about all of the things that you get to influence in that middle, because that middle is probably where you're going to spend most of your time today and tomorrow and the day after that. So get really good about bringing as much positivity into that middle space as you can. And my hope is that none of us have to experience being a prisoner of war. But for those of you that feel a bit like a prisoner in your own mind, I hope today we gave you a key to unlock that door.
Thank you so much.
Well,
All right.
that
Well, with
wraps up
that,
another episode. See, this is how you know it's not scripted. This wraps up an episode of Building Bigger Lives. I'm Michael Regan with Kathryn Peterson. We enjoy bringing you a new episode every week. We hope the topics that we bring are applicable to your life, and we hope that you'll share them with someone else. Feel free to do that in any way you like, including using Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our YouTube channel to simply click an episode and share it with a friend. We, of course, value your likes and comments if you have them, and we look forward to bringing an episode to you again very soon. Hope you enjoyed the Stockdale Paradox, and we'll see you on the next episode.